Hi, Dessa. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So we're going to get started with our interview to learn a little bit more about your research and background and interests. So can you start by introducing yourself to everybody, including what your current appointment is at the university and your educational background?
Sure. I'm a professor in public health, currently the graduate director and coordinator for addiction studies programs. I'm also a faculty in neuroscience and faculty core faculty member in the honors program here, and the associate director for the Center for Health Behavior Research and Innovation. And I also have a research affiliation with the Syracuse VA.
So you're very bored, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about your research?
Sure. I have my research is very focused currently on looking at development of evidence-based interventions for people with trauma and substance use disorders. And the for my work with the VA with veterans, this is the about 12 years into some sequential development we've been doing for a complementary integrative health approach using mindfulness-based strategies for veterans with PTSD. And we have found fantastic outcomes. But what we've really been doing more recently from an implementation science perspective is fine tuning the delivery of that and have moved it to now incorporate the development or the co-training of veterans themselves to peer lead the programs. And we have found almost like a twofold improvement in terms of outcomes when we have a veteran co-leading these programs, which is a fantastic finding
Yeah.
and a really important element too as we look at. I think that these strategies have a lot of public health based potential, and to indicate too that when we look at from a implementation science perspective, that we have people who are from the community or from the identified group that you're trying to work with, um, involved in the delivery and sort of front-facing aspect of those strategies in order to have the target audience really be able to receive that work. So
Yeah.
that's one piece.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's applications for this probably among other populations as well. I know that you've done some work in the space of looking at the impact, like how cravings can be controlled among people who use drugs and things like that. Can you like briefly maybe just talk about that research as well?
Sure. And I actually had to delay this meeting because we were onboarding a new client, and that is an interesting space. So what we're working on is I'm also working with some brilliant engineers who are currently located at Arizona State University. And what we are working with people who have opioid use disorder and are in treatment for it. And they are currently the second phase of this study. They wear a watch that is sort of looks like an Apple Watch, but it's a called an Empatica watch, and it picks up sensor data, everything from looking at heart rate variability, respiration, skin temperature, sweating, all these things that are micro indicators in terms of stress and also sort of withdrawal indicators. And then we have ecological momentary analysis surveys that go out to the participants several times a day. And they ask about perceived level of stress, perceived level of craving, also if they've used any opioids in the past 2 hours, if they've used any nicotine, so that we can kind of control for other things that might influence um, the uh, uh, the readings that we're getting. And they wear these watches for up to 2 weeks. And then we have brilliant engineering PhD students who do the analysis and look at how that compares with control non-opioid use disorder folks. And we're getting a really clear indication of looking at the difference in terms of the stress response. And what in all of this kind of comes down to is it reaffirms some of the neuroscience research, which has shown that there is a reward deficit and a stress surfeit for people with alcohol and other drug use disorders. They feel more intense responses to stress and
Mhm.
less uh, able to find pleasure in everyday events. And so they've got this really tight window that they're operating in from a neurophysiological window. And it is a great indicator of looking at the importance also for opioid or medication for addiction treatment, because we can see the difference also for the people who are on medication and those who are not.
Mm.
And they're much more, they have much less volatility when they're on MAT, and especially in the hours following when they've had their daily dosage.
That's amazing. That's really exciting research that you're doing.
Uh,
How did you get into this space? Like what led to this curiosity of both like behavioral interventions and, substance use more broadly? How did you fall into this?
Um, I early on, a lot of the job opportunities I had were in like, I had worked in an adolescent substance abuse or chemical dependency center, and worked in public school for Oasis in school-based, there it was called ADAPEP, which was Alcohol Drug Abuse Prevention Education Program. So this was like way back in the 90s. It was kind of, very novel. But at that time, like as is often the case, people didn't want to do that work. So the as a young new professional, those opportunities were available to me, and I just found them to be on the one hand, super challenging, but really rewarding. And every day I was learning something new. So it was never boring. And I learned so much about resiliency, and also the super interesting personal stories and experiences from people that I've just always been really drawn to those populations and that work. As heartbreaking as it can be sometimes, it's also super rewarding and very energizing. And obviously, if anybody's honest and looks in their own family and friend group, you can find people who are also struggling with these issues. And so it's I never feel like I have to actually leave work at one end and then I pick up myself at the other end. And so
Mhm.
this seamless sort of connection around these things makes it really rewarding. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's how so many of us end up getting into this field is that it feels like you are adding to a space that is always in need of more, evidence and advocacy. So yeah, that's great. I'm also interested too, you wrote a book that looks at the impact of military conflict on drug use. It's like kind of a global perspective, but also look kind of deeply at the US policies. What got you interested in that relationship? And have you done other research that looks at those types of things?
Yeah, so I got very interested in that. So it was during the time when the US was in Iraq and Afghanistan, so the OEF, OIF space. And I was starting to work with veterans over at the VA, and then also doing some community-based work, and realized how we thought we were going to, for the veterans work we were doing, we thought it would be people coming back from OEF and OIF. And it was really actually a lot of Vietnam veterans, so much older folks. So realizing that there's decades of this impact, and seeing the connection also from when I was growing up during the Vietnam War. I was pretty young, but I still observed it. And to me, the nexus around substance use and war was just so pivotably clear in that space, in terms of it was a way for people to both express sort of counterculture or opposition to what the government was doing, and then also a refuge for people, because society was just really torn apart. And I find many similarities with where we are right now. So we are socially and politically very, very divided. And that I think, has had a huge impact on, even though we um, don't frame it as that, but the escalations of substance use. There's many factors contributing to that, but I think that a lot of it can be contributed to the need for a refuge from a very tense social environment. Um, and the the space that we were in it when I started working on the book, so in the late 2000s, early teens or whatever, was really framed around um, the concerns I had about where we were headed and the impact it has had on generations around those things. So in a nutshell, but I'm continuing to work in that space and actually was just invited to be a keynote speaker at a conference that was inspired by the book. And I met all these people there that I had no idea had any interest in it. And now we're working on a subsequent book there will be editors and a lot of people contributing to looking at this nexus of war, violence, drugs, and trauma, and what is the crossover. And it'll be a much less, hopefully a much less US centric
Mhm.
story, because we now see that it impacts so many different spheres, and it's an obvious connection now, but it was a hard thesis to sort of try to sell at the time.
Yeah, and a part of your book too in the beginning also talks about like drugs being used as a mean of government control, which I
Mhm.
think is really important too. And while they were using it, as more of like a manipulation in the beginning, right? We're now seeing that drug policy still has a huge place in how we try to control individuals and punish and all of
Right.
those things, even in contemporary. Yeah.
I was going to say it's not the space that I'm working in right now, but you bring up a great point too. The other thing that is interesting though to see is how, from a veteran-centric perspective, a lot of the change that we've had in very recent years around both decriminalization and medical access for cannabis, and then the decriminalization and medical access around psychedelics, has been driven by um, the recognition and acknowledgement from veterans that they have found these substances to be helpful for them in both both for cannabis, mostly for kind of managing
Mhm.
PTSD, and with the psychedelics, more for gaining insight into their own experiences and helping them to sort of fast track through sometimes what can be very long and tedious um, psychoanalysis and
Yeah.
therapy. And so so that is another area too, when we look at, on the one hand, it's the old approach that we had about the war on drugs, but here we see how war and the recognition of letting veterans tell their story and kind of demonstrate the leadership around this. We're seeing a huge shift in that space. And so I'm excited to kind of start looking at that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I know that seems like an area that's really important. And again, kind of also ties back to like the role of like veteran peers and like moving
Right.
treatments forward and all of that stuff. It seems like it's a ripe time to access them as a resource for, moving
Yeah.
research and treatment forward. I'm interested, I mean, obviously your research has spanned like a really broad scope. What are some of the takeaways that you've gained from your research that have really moved you the most or stuck with you the most?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I think, um, I mean, I've been really intrigued to see, some of my research involves looking at biomarkers to see if there's actual changes. So moving beyond like self-report measures.
Mhm,
And so I think some of the research that I'm most proud of is for example, the work we were doing with veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, that were going through a brief mindfulness intervention, that we found like significant reductions in terms of cortisol output, which is, cortisol is an indicator of PTSD and adrenal burnout and dysregulation. So we found like in 4 weeks, there was a significant re-regulation of that.
wow.
So to me, that said, like, and that even was evident before their self-report data was like, trending in a positive direction, but the neurophysiology was changing. So for me, those things are just gems that say it really is working on an important level. And there was another study we did with all females that had PTSD, and we were measuring neural correlates and looking at changes in terms of brain activation around emotional regulation, working memory, areas that are impacted by traumatic stress. And we found significant improvements in that after a short 6-week intervention. So to me, those are like, they're just really important because it says this stuff really works. So those are cool. But from the other perspective, I've had the joy of having a lot of really innovative type of work, and it's really come from uh, people who are like in the community or people who've been directly impacted by some of these issues, like working with um, uh, a local colleague, Noble Jennings Bay, around his theory of street addiction, and helping to have people in the community who are impacted by violence and have a perspective, um, put forth a theory, and then help them work on sort of solidifying that and giving validity to those things that are not so academically top down, but really from the community bottom up. So those are I don't know how that fits in there, but those are the exciting parts.
Yeah, no, I think that that's great. I think that that's great. And I think that there's been a push in this field too to have the community more involved in identifying research questions and also being a part of like that data collection and analysis. There seems to be a really big push for that. So it's cool that you're a part of that and contributing to that space. They're lucky to have you. So just a quick fun, final question that I always ask. Is there any like book, podcast, series that you're really into right now?
The podcast I'm enjoying right now, one of them is called Underworld, and it's a couple of podcasters. Some of them, I think they used to be connected with Vice News when Vice News was a little bit more cutting edge or a
Mhm.
little rogue or whatever.
Yeah.
But really looking into, they do a lot of the research for you about looking at everything from like money laundering and cryptocurrency and shadow banking to drug trafficking, drug production, kingpins, how how more recently things are emerging to see like how connected, for example, areas you might otherwise look at as very different or geographically linked organized crime, but like between China and South Asia and Mexico, for example, some of those pieces, crazy things around, what is it, Area 40? No, Bureau 49 or Bureau 39, I can't remember, from North Korea and their meth production and just
Oh.
all these things. And now I start to draw back to some of the different areas I've been in the world. And I remember when lived in Thailand on two different 3-month stints, and there was some nonsense going on, shall we say, with methamphetamine in North Korea at the time. So yeah,
Interesting. It's called Underworld, you said?
yeah, Underworld. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna add that to my library.
Yeah.
That sounds like something that would be really interesting to me too. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to learn more about your research, and I'm excited to be able to share it with everyone that watches. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.